Good morning and welcome into the show. It is Daniel Workman coming to you live from the Dream Imaginate Sports Studios. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, 6 a.m. out west and all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday, April the 24th. Hope you're staying safe out there. Together we can get through this, hopefully sooner rather than later. And hope you are having a great morning, great week. A lot to talk about this morning. The late last night, I got word of a restructuring with the U.S. Youth Soccer National League system and a new showcase format as well. And with that, it seems as though that U.S. Youth Soccer, which is its own sanctioning organization underneath the U.S. Soccer Federation, is moving a little bit away from national and regional travel and more into a more localized format. Now, we don't have specifics yet. What I received is more of a bullet points. So not a bunch of details. I don't know cost, but the information so far is basically indicating that U.S. Youth Soccer and their National League system is going to have an all new structure and format, and when they did a little bit of a Q&A kind of release, kind of an frequently asked questions kind of release, and so the first question: does the U.S. Youth Soccer National League still exist? Yes, but with all new structure and format, based on insights from leadership, member clubs, and outside partner organizations that will elevate the playing environment for all. The second question: what's different about the reimagined U.S. Youth Soccer National League? The National League will no longer be comprised of traditional nationwide brackets and event-specific competitions. It will now consist of regionally aligned conferences with both team-based and club-based league competitions. The champions of each of these National League conferences will advance to the regional championship level of the U.S. Youth National Soccer National Championship Series. In addition to the new National League format, the U.S. Youth Soccer will be rolling out a U.S. YS National Showcase Series, which is what I would say is a little bit of a similar format to the DA showcases. So it's not exactly clear what's happening here, but it seems to be, at least on its surface, a move away from more travel to a little bit more local footprint. And by local, it may not necessarily be city local, but not as much travel as USYS was doing in the past. and then they are creating these showcase series, which are a 3-game Friday, 1 game Friday, 1 game Saturday, 1 game Sunday kind of scenario, and are they're basically, it looks like they're trying to do with the showcases as those are going to be the opportunities for players to be scouted by college scouts, by professional scouts. They're going to try to really make those a priority and a big deal. And then the rest of the calendar, it seems to be more, more local than it has been. Not necessarily local as in I'm playing all of my matches in one city. It seems to be that the footprints are going to be a little bit smaller for the regionally aligned conferences. And then outside of that, it's going to be these occasional showcase series where your team, if it qualifies, is able to go and play in those to be seen and be scouted. We'll need more details. We don't know, but one of the things that we have been talking about a lot on this show is the need to get more local. And so if this is a move towards getting, players and their families in a situation where they have fewer expenses due to travel burdens, then I think that's a good thing. And I'm happy that U.S. Youth Soccer is doing that. We don't have all the details on the cost on the showcases. We don't have the details on exactly what the reimagined U.S. Youth Soccer National League exactly looks like. But I'm sure we'll get that information soon enough, and we'll judge it on its merits. We'll see, how things play out. The bottom line is U.S. Youth Soccer, U.S. Club Soccer, AYSO, all of these different organizations offer different programming. And they all have their sales pitches for why their programming is the best. And really, the problem is that we are missing the key ingredient. And we were close. We were really close. When the Development Academy was created, it was created with an intention to get the best players playing each other. And I don't disagree with that philosophy. Big idea. It's not a bad idea. As a big idea, it's not a bad idea. How the DA was implemented, that's where we ran into some issues. The Federation was really close to getting it right. A few changes, and they could have radically altered the future of American youth soccer. And the few changes they needed to make was open up the Development Academy to every club in the country. Tier the Development Academy based on on-field performance. Tier the Development Academy based on club operations. And by club operations, I'm not talking about necessarily money. I'm talking about club operations from the standpoint of show us what you're doing to develop players. Show us your club methodology. Show us your curriculum. Show us You can get up in front of parents and say, we're going to play this style and we're going to do it this way. But that's a sales pitch. What are you actually doing? Is there a consistency in the methodology of your coaches? So club operations, that's what I mean by that. What are you doing from a footballing, sporting side of your operations? That would be another factor. And then open it up to everyone. Make it accessible to everyone and have multiple tiers based on on-field performance and based on some of these developmental metrics, right? So you may be having on-field success with one of your teams, but is that team indicative of the way the rest of your club is performing in terms of their coaching, their development philosophy, etc.? So what are you doing as a club? And then how are you doing on the field as a club? And open it up to everybody. When you do it that way, now we don't have U.S. Youth Soccer and U.S. Club Soccer and AYSO and other organizations offering their own programming. Well, until the Federation, which has vacated their responsibility in the termination of the DA, until you open that up to everybody and have all that available, you're going to have all of this alphabet soup of youth soccer programming. So now we see USYS with an update to theirs. We see U.S. Club Soccer touting the ECNL as the best available for your clubs. We'll see. None of these can say they're the best. And the reason why they can't say they're the best is because there's no tiering system based on merit. U.S. Club Soccer has not earned their way to First Division Youth Soccer. That doesn't exist. They're just an organization running programming. They may feel that what they do is better. They can't prove it. USYS is in the same boat. We may feel our format and programming is better. We can't prove it. So what does this do to parents? I don't know. We'll see. And we're about to have a conversation coming up in just a minute after the break about the Development Academy and the aftermath. And we'll get into some of that, and we'll see where that is and how that's shaping up for families across this country. But before we do, our sponsor this half hour is Duktig Brand, DUKTIG brand.com. And look, if you have not gone to DuktigBrand.com just to check them out, you should check them out today. You got nothing better to do. Get online, check them out today, DuktigBrand.com. And if you find something you like, maybe it's a t-shirt, maybe it's one of their planners, use this promo code DW Show. You'll get 10% off of your order at DuktigBrand.com. We'll be right back after this. welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday morning. I hope you're having a great day and a great week. Joining us now on the show is a freelance journalist that's covering American soccer and all of its crazy facets and rabbit trails, etc. is Charles Boehm. Charles, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
Thanks for having me on. I'm doing fine, and I'm going to have to use that rabbit trail line, I think. I think I may have to cop that from you.
Yeah, look, there's so many places to go. We were just talking at the top of the show about, the fact that you have this alphabet soup in the youth space. It's been there for a few decades now, and U.S. Youth Soccer entered that space back in 2007 with the Development Academy, and then vacated that space with their recent announcement of the termination of the Development Academy. Wanted to bring you on to kind of talk through a little bit of the DA and then get into the aftermath of the DA. What were your thoughts on the Development Academy as it was constructed before the announcement that it was terminated?
Well, I guess it's probably a symbol of how convoluted and crowded it is that I feel like I'm compelled to make a small note, just that U.S. Youth Soccer is distinct from U.S. Soccer, which, as opposed to the federation, as opposed to the biggest youth entity that's a member of the federation. So just to be clear, so no one gets confused. So the DA is a federation initiative dating back to 2007. And, I've been kind of watching it for a long time, and I would say that it's a great idea. It did a lot. It advanced the game, I would say. I think its legacy will overall be positive, but some of the factors in its sort of untimely or rapid demise are reflective of challenges, contradictions that date back almost, not quite, but almost to its beginning. Because I think the fundamental issue that I came up against in looking at the DA over and over is that it was the first time the federation itself had waded in with actual youth soccer league programming, and the federation did so because it felt that alphabet soup, that chaotic youth soccer state of affairs that it was looking at as it tried to improve the national teams was simply not creating a conducive environment to player development. And so they took the rather unusual step of running their own league. And I think there will be a positive legacy in the sense of some of the concepts that were advanced in the DA were at the time sort of very progressive ideas that were not the norm in American youth soccer. And now there's more of the norm has been advanced when we're talking about training to game ratios, getting top players competing against one another in training on a regular basis, and then playing against one another on a regular basis, nudging the pro game along into proper sort of academy structures. However, when a federation gets involved in league programming, it's sort of like the best metaphor I've come up with is this is when you stop being a referee and become another player in the game, right? So even if you had really good motives for doing so, even if you felt that it was an urgent necessity that you had no other way of attacking, you're still sort of wading into the muck of politics, of conflict, of competition. And I think that was something that we'll have to look at it as we sort of pick up the pieces of all this, that it's always, it was a gamble and a risk for the Fed to sort of get involved. And pretty soon, the nature of the federation, by it being a top-down entity, eventually started to have an effect on the DA and its members.
In terms of that fine line, when I look at the Development Academy, and for all of its, successes, there were some things that I felt like was severely crippling towards its ultimate success, and I think it's one of the reasons why it eventually led to its termination, and that is it didn't go far enough from an administrative point of view. I get your analogy on the referee becoming the player on the field. When you enter the youth space and you basically run, think of it like a boutique hotel. They ran kind of a boutique league, right? We're going to let a few players in, the ones that we think are the best, and we're just going to run this over here for what we think are like premium clients, and then we're just going to let everybody else, stay at your average hotel chain, and you guys just keep doing whatever you're doing over there. And if we don't like it, we'll try to step in and police to make sure all hotels in the country are run efficiently. But we're going to just focus that the best are going to stay in these boutique hotels, right? So just kind of an analogy here. When looking at the Development Academy, I would argue that from an administrative standpoint, they would have been better off administering a nationwide system of connected leagues rather than trying to get in and compete against U.S. club soccer and U.S. youth soccer and kind of go to war with them in terms of, okay, we're the best. You guys can no longer claim you're the best, and we're just going to offer this to this small subset. If they had gone and said, look, we're going to work with all of our state associations and organize, that the state leagues are going to feed into a regional pattern that's going to feed into some type of, maybe conference type of setup that eventually feeds into this, development academy premier kind of level, which is where you would generally find like the professional academies playing in overseas. Instead of really organizing everything, it seems to be that by kind of just sticking their toe in the water and not going all the way into the pool and wading into administering the youth game, that the hybrid approach really kind of bit them in the butt in the end. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that aspect of this, that they didn't go all the way and organize pathways for every club in the country, and instead just decided that we're only going to operate for kind of a 1% and still try to influence everything else while running this kind of boutique setup over here on the side.
I think there's a lot of merit to that. The other issue I see is in a macro sense is that you have this spectrum. You want to have the highest level of competition you can get in that sort of top national league concept, which means you want to have the most successful clubs with the most resources, with the best players and the best teams, and you want to make it attractive to the best talent, whether it's coaches or players and so forth. And you want to have every game be meaningful, be balanced, be competitive. So that's on one end of the spectrum. But then on the other is the scale of this country. Even if you just focus on large metropolitan areas, which the DA typically did, then you're going to dealing with it just absolutely devastating travel costs, even for the federation. Even with the federation underwriting it, dumping millions a year into it. I mean, the budget was doubling every few years, and that's, even if you think that $9-10 million is something that this federation should be able to absorb, when you look at the trajectory, it's significant. And so that's the travel and the scale and the scope of things is constantly working against you. So I think the challenge in it required a really elegant solution. It required a mindset, I think, that maybe is not necessarily does not necessarily get cultivated in the culture of the U.S. Soccer Federation at this time, is to find that sort of elegant balance between getting the best against the best without having to fly them around the country and rack up incredible costs. I mean, over the years, I've talked to different MLS Academy people and people in and around the top MLS academies, and they're spending just absurd amounts of money just to get players from point A to point B, much less before you get into the expenses of coaching, of facilities, of potentially residential academies, covering the costs for all the players, which is an expectation I think that people had, understandably. So the question was always, how can you create the best competition with the least travel? And I thought it was frustrating to me was just when it seemed like the DA had gotten big enough to allow for some regionalization, then they created this tier system, right? Which then required people to start traveling all over again. play at the start of last DA season, a month before the season was starting last summer. The clubs were told that, there's now this red-blue system, and you're going to be, you might have to travel from Washington, D.C., let's say, where I live, to Montreal for one league game. I mean, that's absurd. And one of the things that, the expectation, I think there's a sense that MLS always wanted to break away and always wanted to do an all-pro academy. But actually, I don't entirely think that's correct, because if you just look at the amount of money that MLS spends on trucking its players, its first-team players around for league matches around this enormous continent, and then the idea of if you take the Liga MX model where you take the youth teams, the top two youth teams with the first team on the league schedule, then you're tripling your travel costs. And this is, a league that limits charter flights and that sort of thing. So the biggest obstacle has always been the scale of this country, and that remains. That is a very durable problem.
A few days ago, I saw a couple of tweets from @coach_DJC_MKSC, who was talking about Barcelona. They're my favorite club in the world, and talking about their youth system and what the reality is for the likes of their youth teams, youth players, youth development environment, etc. And he said this: a couple of years ago, I got to attend Barcelona's U15 team with Xavi Simons play a local team. They won 12-1. They didn't play in some made-up league that claims to be elite. They played in a local league with local kids. Last time I checked, the development of those kids is better than the development of ours. Why aren't they creating these special leagues to play other quote-unquote elite clubs? Notice how they always say clubs too, not teams, clubs. What makes a club elite? Actually, what's the difference between mine and yours? Here's the real question. Are you too lazy to find competition, or are you afraid to play your local clubs for fear of losing, and then a fear of losing your kids, which equal losing money? I'm going to bet it's because you don't want to lose money. I think his last few points there, he was kind of talking about some of these local teams that are clubs that are, in the pay to play is the way that they fund their programs. Parents paying fees. Major League Soccer is operating differently with their top level academy teams that they have been funding. But this idea that Barcelona, they're not traveling all over Spain, and as we know, Spain's not near the geographic juggernaut that is the United States to tackle, and yet they're staying local. They're not traveling all over to Madrid and other places to play. They're playing teams in their own Regionalista league format, and looking at the country and knowing the fact that we are a continent-sized country, we expand coast to coast. With matter of fact, we got two states we can't even get to very easily, and that's something we never talk about in relation to the development academy or professional systems. We never talk about Alaska and Hawaii, and so just talking on the 48 continental states and the massive size that is this country, why do we have this obsession that we think to play good enough competition to develop our players, that we have to have players traveling enormous distances? I get the cost. Yeah, I mean, when you go that far, it's going to cost money. There's no way around that. If you choose travel as a metric for any aspect, whether you call yourself elite or you think that's the only way you can play the best of the best, and somehow that matters, which I don't think it matters near as much as we say it does. Not to outweigh the balance of the cost. It's always going to be expensive. So you're in DC. There's a lot of quality players and quality clubs and quality teams that those players don't have to leave the DC metro area. Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland. it's not like we should be seeing those teams have to get on an airplane, fly to Florida to play a team. I mean, to me, that's just absurd at the youth level that we've been, and the Federation has been part of this, advocating for longer travel distances as if our players, are really benefiting from it when the rest of the world doesn't operate their youth systems that way. I mean, Brazil, a country similar in size, is not sending their teams all over the country to try to get them quote unquote elite games. Is that something you think that ultimately, that philosophy ultimately was one of the major factors that caused U.S. soccer to end the program?
I mean, you can't divorce this from the times. I mean, there's certainly factors that were building up to predating the coronavirus pandemic. But right now, the reality of our current crisis is forcing a lot of really hard decisions, hard reality checks. And so I think that things are going to look different from now on to some extent, no matter what. And I would say there's a deep tradition we have in American soccer. It dates back 100 years in multiple levels and contexts where, and maybe it's the American character, maybe it's just the capitalist society that we are dominated by, but there's a tradition of taking your ball and going somewhere else if you don't like what you're dealing with the status quo, right? Whether it's starting your own team, starting your own club, or even starting your own league, right? We've had soccer wars over league organization that have repeatedly shot the sport in the foot, in multiple different occasions. So I think there's certainly an issue there that there's a profit motive here. Clubs and teams and coaches that want to distinguish themselves in a competitive market are going to present travel, because travel has taken on the trappings of elite, right? There was a time when travel was necessary for the very best teams, and may still be in some contexts. If the very best teams and players want to go have this experience or benefit from the experience of having a professional type of environment with a trip and a hotel and playing on the road and all these sorts of things, and there are benefits to that. Things that then it became wrapped up in the trappings of quality, of player and team quality, and then got so divorced from all that because a multi-billion-dollar industry grew out of this, of travel soccer. Now, that's only one sector of a multi-billion-dollar youth soccer sector. I think it's safe to say that the travel industry is looking at some pretty daunting realities ahead of them. But unfortunately, we got this idea that this is what the best players do, and therefore to be the best player, or to consider myself or my kid in that category, then this is normal. And there is, I think we'll look back on the last 20 years or so and say that there was a sort of collective insanity that took root, in the sense of spending incredible amounts of money on hotels and car trips and flights and all these things. And yeah, the Federation probably got, again, it's getting yourself in trouble when you have to try and solve these problems and enter into this world. I mean, the Federation was always sort of coming in and having to try and build consensus, connect with clubs, make DA membership valuable to clubs, then placate them once they were in the tent. And there's only so much change you can enact in a certain amount of time as a newcomer to the space, right? And I think that's one of the contradictions that ended up making things leading the Federation to pull the plug.
Speaking of pulling the plug, the Federation put out the COVID-19 pandemic as its primary reason for pulling the plug. But long before we had a pandemic, there were whispers and rumors of the demise of the DA, and that it was coming. So I know that the legal fees that U.S. Soccer is incurring, are having an effect on the budget, and then obviously because of their kind of, I call it a worldview, right, of the travel that we've got to do all this travel to do the DA, that that view rather than going, hey, how do we reduce our cost, get away from traveling so much, operate the DA at a more regional level with the occasional travel versus, hey, we're just going to go all in on travel. Looking at U.S. Soccer's decision, what do you think really did, ultimately lead us here? If these conversations we're having, Taylor Twelman tweeted about this, that he'd been hearing about the cancellation of the DA for 6 months. I'm pretty sure we weren't talking coronavirus pandemic in November to the point of the whole world basically being on quarantine. So what do you think ultimately led us here? What factors? I'm sure it's more than one, but in your opinion, what do you think really got us to this point where U.S. Soccer just said, we're going to use this time as a convenient time to say we're done, adios, goodbye, we're walking away? What factors you think got him to that point?
Yeah, so I've been trying to talk to as many people in and around the DA who have sort of to get as many points as possible on this, to try and put it all together. There's, I think, hopefully later today I'll have a piece dropping on soccerwire.com that presents a little bit of the inside information I've been able to scrap together. Unfortunately, I think there's a perfect storm element here, because this is all happening in and around the context of a federation that's at a probably historic low, at least in the modern history, in the sense of its financial fortunes having suddenly turned, its leadership being in turmoil, and its overall relationship and credibility with the general American soccer community has probably never been lower. And I thought it was reflective of that I heard all these different theories and tidbits of information, some of which I was able to confirm as apparently accurate, others just left field. And I don't necessarily blame people for entertaining some of the rumors that I heard, just because everything pertaining to Federation business right now is contentious, has this sort of Kremlinology about it, where you have to try and read through tea leaves and look through funhouse mirrors. So I think that these sort of conversations about the future of the DA have been happening for some time, and MLS has been contemplating how it's going to address its frustrations with the DA and the tiering into the red-blue tiers that they initiated on short notice last year that really antagonized a lot of people. Probably is reflective of the Federation trying to figure out how to run it better. But in terms of actually shutting the whole thing down, I know that I don't know what the better term is than conspiracy theories. I don't mean that term in a dismissive way, but just I know there's a significant number of people in the community who perceive that this is all happening sort of as a grand plan. I can't find any evidence of that. What I'm finding evidence of is that new leadership came in the form of Will Wilson, the new CEO, and Cindy Parlow-Cone, the new president. And in this sort of sudden financial bearishness that's set in on everyone, right? I mean, every major entity in America right now is second guessing every dollar they're spending, simply because the dollars that they were planning to spend are not coming in the door right now. And I think they felt that they had to come in and make some significant, tough, sort of searing decisions about programming and budgeting, because they feel like the bottom dropped out of the finances of the Federation. Now, and I think you can certainly make the case that the DA is not the place to start on that, but talking to people to coaches and TDs, this all came up like even Federation people, like sort of development academy, silo people who are maybe not necessarily at executive level discussions, but are involved in the running of the Federation and communications with member clubs. They were all started getting calls. I think it was about 2 weeks ago today. So I think it started 2 Fridays ago, where suddenly it was like, what's the DA could get shut down. Like, everybody figured that the current season would probably not get finished, but then there was talk like, well, the whole thing's going to shut down. What's going on here? But there were hours and hours of conference calls among coaches and TDs, and we're talking all DA members, MLS, non-MLS, going, okay, what's happening here? What can we do? How can we save this thing? And I'm told by multiple sources that the member clubs said to the federation, hey, let us help you. Let's get this. Let's save this thing. We'll cover different costs. Like there were event costs, there are refereeing costs that the member clubs offered to pick up to make it easier for the Fed to keep going with the DA, and they were turned down. And so that leads me to believe that this wasn't a sort of. I think this was a top-down decision that the new leadership felt they had to make. That they weren't happy about what they saw in terms of the financial trajectory of the organization. And once they did it, there wasn't a whole lot of debate. Now that is for better or worse the culture of the federation too. I think is that there's a little bit of that top-down mentality, but they are panicking, and I think it's you could argue that there was artifice in laying off 20% of their staff and the CEO taking a 50% pay cut on the same day as they shutter the federation, the DA. But I think it would. I can't see enough evidence that there was a grand plan there. I think that they were panicking about the money, plain and simple. And the DA, with the problems that it had, with the challenges, with the rising spending, just became an easy target that no longer had enough determined defenders on staff anymore. I mean, the people that built the DA as we know it 13 years ago and in the years since, many of them are no longer there. And so there's that sort of internal political aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I say that, like the Taylor Twellman tweet when he was talking about he's been hearing about this for 6 months, I don't mean a grand conspiracy or grand plan. What I think COVID-19 became the convenient timing, but I think we were always heading here, right? That the Federation was looking at the program and the expenses of the program, and if you're not willing, as I said, to go at this from an administrative point of view rather than we're going to front all of the cost, right? So, if you think of it as the Federation operating as a federation versus the Federation trying to operate as, another U.S. club or U.S. youth soccer type of organization, they instead of just sanctioning and administering, basically like, you set up a March Madness tournament bracket, right? And you go, hey, here's the NCAA tournament. Here's the, 64, 68. I lose count every year. They're adding some play-in, game, right? But instead of rolling out a nationwide bracket every year, going, okay, hey, here's the tier 1 bracket. Here's the tier 2 bracket. Here's the tier 3 bracket. Okay, you guys go play. Right? That doesn't cost the Federation much in the way of operations, travel costs, etc. Where I think they, got it wrong is what you talked about when they entered in as a competitor. Like, we're not just going to administer the bracket and put it out there for everyone. We're going to come in and get, heavily financially invested in the programming, the day-to-day, the operations of that bracket. We're not just going to sanction your clubs and say, okay, you're in this tier, go play. Here's the expenses you guys have to incur whenever you go play. So make sure you bring your, $150 to pay for the referees kind of thing. It went beyond that. And so when they got into it from a programming standpoint, I think that we were always heading here because the fundamental changes that would have need to have happened for the Federation to operate as more of as the administration level rather than a programming level. I don't think they could see the forest from the trees. It was kind of like, we're just going to, if we can't afford it, we're just going to cut it. We're not going to try to fix it or save it. As you pointed out, there was very little communication with the Development Academy clubs, directors, and even parents who were all just left in the dark, which to me is another very disappointing aspect of this whole situation, that the Federation continues to operate so poorly as an organization when it comes to leadership and communication. You have all of these stakeholders who have, put programming, they've invested themselves into doing things a certain way for so long, and to not have any active participation in this decision-making process, even if the federation ultimately decided, look, we just are going to get out of this space where we don't want to do administration. We don't want to pay anymore for the programming and the travel. We just want to be done. That's fine. But to not even bring them into that process, to me, is very disappointing.
Yeah, and I think you unfortunately, well, for better and for worse, right? And we see this possibly beyond the soccer sphere in these times. Crises really highlight the strengths and weaknesses of organizations and their leadership, because it's the nature of this federation, and quite possibly federations around the world, thanks to FIFA's sort of structuring of the administrative side of the game, that they are accustomed to dictating. They are not necessarily accustomed to communicating, marshaling consensus, building, kind of a collective approach to things. And this goes back to the early years of the DA. I mean, one of the things that drove coaches nuts, as much as they liked what, the positive aspects developmentally that the DA was bringing to the landscape, early on, you were told not just how, tactically and stylistically and philosophically how they wanted you to play. They were told you what formation to play in. So this was back when Claudio Reyna's technical curriculum dropped. Every DA club was told, we expect you to play 4-3-3 with, your wingers doing this and this. And this was kind of in the phase where, the Barcelona system was probably the driving philosophical inspiration for the federation's, tactical outlook. And coaches, I remember talking to coaches who had won national championships at the collegiate level, and then would go in and we're coaching their local DA club and being told, like, we playing three in the back, like, that's going to affect your evaluation, which is just, looking back, it was absurd, but they were learning as they went, because they were trying to figure out how to make this thing work the way they wanted it to. And the knee-jerk reaction was, we're going to set out this list of to-dos that you are to meet. And if not, you'll suffer on some level, whether it's your place in the DA will be up for question or your end of year evaluations. And, they had a pretty clear set of an annual report that every club was getting graded on certain metrics and certain departments, everything from your facilities to your coach's sideline demeanor. And over time, it got almost like it got regulated to death. And I've talked to so many people who said, and again, you're talking about college coaches who recruit top DA prospects, right? Blue chip, best players in the nation, and they get to college and they've never played in a cauldron type of environment because the DA was sort of sterile, right? Even coaches were afraid to yell at terrible refereeing decisions because, well, that's going to affect your grade, right? And then that could affect you personally as a coach. That could affect your club. That could affect your players. So unfortunately, we see that some of the flaws, the wider flaws in the federation's way of doing things came to light here. So, and I have to point out too, what I think was a really strategic error was launching the girls DA. That was 3 years ago now, I believe. And there was this sense that coming off the 2015 Women's World Cup title, the litigation and the sort of the conflict that I guess led us to the current litigation with the women's national team over pay equity was hanging over the federation. And they felt like, okay, we've got this platform for the men. We have to build it for the women to stay on top and to shield ourselves from these accusations of sexism that are gathering. And so on paper, you can say that was a good idea, but it ended up doubling the size of everything, doubling the cost of everything. And with the ECNL having sort of stood up independently, something roughly comparable to the DA in terms of its place in the landscape, that meant that instead of clarifying the situation, they just murked it up further by having now two national competitive leagues that were siphoning talent from one another, that were competing tenaciously for players, for clubs, and so now the top girls talent across the country has been watered down by being spread across two competitions. So we talk about a classic example of sort of wading into a situation, and instead of fixing it, you just get worse. You just become another layer of complication and chaos that gets piled on. So, and I think I have to say, I think that the girls' DA played a real big factor in the decision to pull the plug, because the girls' DA didn't seem to be working, but I don't think they felt that they had the choice of just shutting down one. It was that everything was going to go out the door at once, so they couldn't be accused of discriminating against the women's game. So, and you mentioned the idea of a cup competition. I think that's great. I think the unfortunately one idea that's gotten lost in all this was the DA Cup, was this effort to create a cup competition to be balanced alongside the league. And I think that would be one great idea that should be salvaged from all this. But at this point, who knows who would take that on?
Yeah, and speaking of taking things on, I mean, I think this is where the Federation really messed up. This whole getting involved in programming versus administration. You can, like I said, you can put out brackets and you can say, hey, here's where you play based on your on-field performance. You finish top of your league or your group or what have you. And you can factor in, that you get audited in terms of, what's your club methodology, what's your club programming, etc. But this idea that every team in the DA had to play the same way, I mean, whoever thought that idea was a good idea, that is completely absurd and naive. And we know this watching, football matches every weekend. Barcelona plays Atletico Madrid, Liverpool play against Man City. All four of those clubs play a little bit different to the other. Some have more similarities than others do, but it's not the same tactics. It's not the same exact formation. That's part of what makes the game so beautiful, is it's like, a puzzle that has to get solved every weekend, and you go about trying to solve it differently. And you look at a manager. I'm not a big fan of Jose Mourinho, but others are, and he is a chameleon with his tactics. I mean, he'll change his teams and his setups based on what he thinks will give him success on the day, and I think his tactic is winning. Like, that's what he cares about the most, and so he doesn't stay committed to a philosophy where you get on the other side and you see a Pep Guardiola that is absolutely committed to his methodology and philosophy and believes in it so much that if he loses, he says we didn't execute well enough, not that our methodology was flawed or what have you, and all of those beautiful layers and tactical complications. It's kind of like the DA was treated as if everybody could only do adding and subtracting and multiplying and division. We're not going to get into geometry. We're not going to get into, algebra 1, algebra 2, trigonometry. You're only going to take those math lessons that include basic mathematics, and by telling everyone you had to play 4-3-3 and you had to do this just like everybody else, and you had to, like, of course you're going to get accused of creating robots and having no passion and no soul, and that the players were ill prepared to play at the highest levels around the world when they came out, because they had been basically in a watered down tactical environment for so long, and when everything's uniformed, you really remove that cognitive learning experience from the players. And then, as you mentioned, you bring in the women's DA, and now you have a men's and women's development academy program, boys and girls development academy program. And when your philosophy is not administration, let's set up the March Madness, brackets and make sure everything's organized on just a pure, just like I would say the same way that they go about the U.S. Open Cup, right? So if they had taken that approach, now I'm not talking about their lack of support for TV deals and promotion and all that, but I'm talking about the U.S. Open Cup, U.S. Soccer, that's their one event that they are solely like responsible for organizing, and they make sure these teams get put in the brackets and they go and they play, on this day at this stadium, etc. Had they overseen a nationwide system of just organization of schedules and overseen from an auditory, not auditory, but a kind of an oversight aspect and auditing of the organizations in terms of making sure they have their club philosophy and development package, all in place, then I don't think we would have been incurring these massive expenses. And I think the game would have been better off letting all of these, different flavors bubble up from different clubs all over the country. In the aftermath of all this, last question here, where do you think we go? Where do you think we end up in the aftermath here in these next few years?
Well, I'll start with a sunny scenario, a more optimistic approach, which is it's possible that the DA's closure, that this crisis we find ourselves in socially, shocks the existing players in this landscape into getting out of their usual routines and rut and perspectives, and leads to some conversations happening that have not been happening enough. We're hearing, I'm hearing ECNL talking to MLS, right? ECNL talking to the DA, whereas there was kind of a cold war there. U.S. youth soccer is making noises about, trying to offer a platform comparable to DA. Now, bear in mind that organization has its own issues, and its sort of problems were one of the reasons that the DA was created in the first place, right? So there's plenty of blame to go around, but my hope is that people will recognize the scope of the issues and the severity of the current situation, the potentially transformative crossroads we find ourselves at, and so just to sort of break down the enmity and the competition mentality that they have, at least in the sense of organizations. There's no reason that ECNL teams and U.S. Youth Soccer National League teams can't play one another. There's no reason that we can't create a way to have some kind of overarching system. Maybe even ODP gets brought back up and gets reformed and improved, and the motives of those involved get redirected towards the bigger picture of player development, of pure competition. That's the bright side. I hope that will happen. That people can understand that it's time for something new, and that starts with conversations with people that maybe you hate, that you've been competing against for decades. The more pessimistic framing, I think, is that the crab barrel mentality has won in this case. The Federation has had to retreat, whether we think it's for financial reasons or other, and we'll kind of have to get out of the space, and we'll be back to this cutthroat competition for teams and players, club jumping, all that sort of pissing contest, for lack of a better term, pardon my language, will rear their heads again and become the dominant experience. But I think that the macro circumstances with potentially no travel soccer for a long time, and we may be doing social distancing on soccer fields and stadiums for the next year or more. So we're in sort of unprecedented times. And my hope is that crisis can turn into an opportunity. But it's very conceivable that everybody goes right back to tending their little patch of grass and fighting for it tenaciously and trying to protect the revenue streams they can get their hands on. And devil takes the hindmost.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the vacuum and the void that is the leadership vacuum. Within the Federation, it just seems like the organization has been so poorly run for so long. We've been left with this, this void, this space, and it's just been chaos. Programs running, basically independently of each other, not in cooperation with each other. And you've had programs like the ODP and others that, in theory, sounds like a great idea, and then you get in there and you realize, like, this is just a money grab in politics, and there's no real value here. I mean, ultimately, we keep trying to reinvent the wheel at every level. MLS, the USL, all the way down into the adult amateur space and into the youth space. And the reason why we're doing this is because we refuse to learn the lessons from those who have done it better than us around the world. And until the federation becomes the organizers of a national system on the adult level as well as on the youth level, that at its most grassroots levels is focused on local competition, based on sporting merit that feeds into more regional, and then eventually at your highest levels of professional soccer, then you can look at your national setups. I look at a country like Brazil, in a country similar in size and landmass, and we obviously know they produce players on a much greater scale than we do, and of much greater quality. Their aim is not to get kids to college. Their aim is to get kids to the professional game, and having solidarity payments, training compensation, having their first teams at their clubs with the opportunity to win and move up and get access to more revenue. None of those principles exist in our system, and therefore we keep trying to reinvent the wheel, hoping that we get it right this time. And I just think we're destined for more and more chaos until we actually sit down and address the real issues at the heart of this whole mess. And that is that we're one country. U.S. Soccer likes to say we're one nation, one team. But if we are one nation, then treat us that way. Make us one country and say, hey, look, the best ideas, the best clubs, the best operations, they're going to win. They're going to win on the field, and that's going to be labs of innovation all over this country. And wherever you fall in that pecking order, you fall in that pecking order. And maybe you do really, really well, and maybe you thought you'd do really well, and you've got things to work on to actually get there. But until we have that kind of connectivity across the country, and that's going to take leadership from the federation, I think we're destined for more frustration. I'm hopeful. I'm very optimistic in general, so I'm hopeful, Charles, that some of your hopes come true. Reality says we're going to be stuck in this for quite a while. So who knows? We'll see. But look, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to having you back on again soon to talk some other things in the future. But appreciate your time and your work.
Thanks for having me, and let's see how this unfolds, and have a great show.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. That is Charles Boehm joining the show. I really appreciate him spending some time with us here on the show and giving us his thoughts on the Federation and the Development Academy. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope that you stay safe out there, and that we all get through this sooner rather than later. We're facing a bunch of uncertainty in terms of when we can get back on the field and when programming can restart and all that. And the most important thing is that we stay safe, and hopefully we can get through this sooner rather than later. Have a great weekend. We'll see everybody again on Monday.